All right. Fantastic. Okay. Here we are. We're doing more game reviews. This is a review that was submitted by Los. Los was playing Dreamer in this game, and Los had the black pieces. So we're going to be looking at the game from his perspective. So this is, I don't have any context for exactly when this game was played, but it is a turn 0 game that was played between Dreamer and Los. And that's pretty much all we got. Let's just see what happens. Okay, so we start off knight f3. Everyone starts knight f3, especially in turn 0. Not very much explanation is needed, but generally, you know, what you want to do is cover in these standard variants, f2 and f7. Best way to do that is with this knight here. It blocks the diagonal travel to the f2 pawn. It also prevents a queen from hopping into, for example, h4 and doing a sack onto f2, etc. And you're probably going to see something very similar from the black side here. That's just how it goes. This is just most openings start like this. It just saves you a lot of headache in this variant. Greetings from my grad school classroom. Greetings, David. This in many ways is also a grad school classroom. Here we are. Okay. D4 played by Dreamer. This is probably the most common opening, right? For this sort of like weird London F-esque system with like the knight f3 first, in turn 0 is just like what's played most frequently. Because the knight out here, turn 1, prevents a travel onto f2 from this diagonal, or you know, this file, but it's a diagonal in spacetime. And d4 prevents a travel to f2 from the triagonal here, or you know, the space diagonal or whatever. Okay, usually we just see d5 here, and then you know, game moves on. Usually c3, c6. Here, Los responds immediate spice. Los responds c5. What the hell's going on here? This is spicy. c5 is pretty spicy. I think that this is the I think that this maybe is what Los calls the Sarperen defense or something like that. It's like the immediate challenging of this d-pawn. If Sarp's around, maybe you can, or Los, maybe you can correct me, but I think this is the thing that they refer to as the Sarperen defense. Not positive, but I think so. Okay, so immediately challenging this pawn, which is interesting. There's not really a reason to not do this. You aren't preventing, like immediately, a travel onto f7. But, you know, if you were to like push this, if white was to push this pawn in order to try to, in order to try to get the queen out and do a sack, then you could just push this pawn again. So it's not like, you know, it's not that bad. You don't have that much to worry about. It's mostly, I think, just slightly Monka-esque from like a structural perspective for black. I mean, we'll see how it develops. I don't think that this is immediately triggering like any alarm bells. It's just kind of weird. It's kind of weird. You know, D pawn forward allows you to develop your bishop in like a way that makes a lot of sense. What this does mean is that you can get your knight out without blocking in your c pawn, which is a good thing. Hello, some of the seniors rating the Minecraft map. We haven't done the parkour bit yet. Sounds good. Okay, so this is always interesting. What did you deal with this? I've seen a few attempts to respond to this. Also, good night because time zones. All right, have a good night, Sarp. Thanks for checking in. Okay, let's see what happens here. C3 happens and is the most natural response, I think. Ooh, my opening. Okay, I was right. So this is the Sarp opening here. Oh, so okay, you pushed d4. So you're gonna want to cover the diagonal to your king. That, you know, just so that you don't get wrecked, because otherwise, like in a turn, this is gonna be checkmate, right? Or something like that. And you don't need to respond to this immediately. If a capture happens here immediately, then, you know, you can worry about like how to respond. I don't know if probably you don't want to take immediately as black anyway. This tension is fine for you. I think what happens, if I remember correctly, I think that you develop the queen here first, and then you try to sort of like grapple for the center. I've always enjoyed playing the white side of this opening. I think that white has more than enough tools to kind of deal with like the counterplay that black is trying to generate. Queen b6 is forced to prevent white's f7 sack. That's a good point. Well, if this happens, like next turn, then you can queen b6 next turn, and in response to white's travel, you can do the, like, you know, get the queen on b6 here to c or b6 on the other board on the new timeline that's made to prevent the queen from delivering checkmate on that board. So I don't even think it's counter travel stuff. I think you can wait until this queen comes out to bring your queen out so that you can use this queen without using a timeline to go back and prevent the opponent from delivering mate. But we won't go too deep into the f7 theory stuff, but probably queen out you want to do anyway. Otherwise this is kind of impotent. Like then you're super on the back foot. Like imagine like takes here and then the queen recaptures, and then it's like, okay, I don't have any pieces, and my opponent's queen is gonna maybe like get to a position where he can sack and then just destroy me. So that's an issue. Oh, but maybe I guess what you're saying is, okay, so if you did something that wasn't bringing this queen out and this happened, then I guess you do need to, okay, so if you didn't do this, then you'd have to do something that prevents your opponent from sacking their queen, not like travel wise, but just like on the board, 2D style, like this or something like that. Because if I don't know, you do whatever, like this takes here and then the queen goes here, then if you do queen out here, your opponent has the opportunity to just straight up 2D sack their queen, which forces the king to come out, and then they travel this knight one turn in the past, and that's checkmate. So that is pretty spooky. So you can't do anything, but you know, whatever. Queen out's probably good. You can also do c4, not good at all. Yeah, okay, c4 is another way to prevent the queen from coming out here, but it's overextended. Maybe it's good. I would imagine that it's not very good. Oftentimes in this position, I either see c takes d4 or e6 or queen b6. Those are the three moves that we've discussed, so that checks out. Probably developing the queen, I think, is good here. If I had to guess. What happens? Okay, in the game we do get queen b6. Sensible, for reasons that we just went over, so we won't worry about it too much. Now as white, is there anything to worry about? Not really. What have I done here in the past? I think I have a document that details what exactly I do in this position. I can't remember if anything is forced here. We're getting into like a little bit of theory. There's something. It might be knight bd2. It might be e3. I think one of those things is what I do here. I think. I'm not positive. Biggest mistake I see is people move the bishop. I think in the past you've played e3. I could be wrong. I think I have played e3. You know what? Let's actually just pull up my document that I have, my super secret strats that I utilize. Let's see. Bit of a lull in the action, but that's okay. I am curious. I'm curious what I do here. So I've played against this a fair number of times. I think I played against this against mage and also Los and also Sarp at some point in the past. Let's see. Where's my 5D chest? Here we go. Okay. Turn 0 openings. What do I do here? Against. Oh, it's right at the top. Okay. Against 2c5, 3 queen b6. Okay, so apparently I go for e3 here. Okay. I like to go for e3 here. And then usually knight c6 happens. Oh yeah, and then in response to knight c6, I push d5. And then there's like a sort of I won't go super far into the theory for like what, but there are a couple moves that are kind of forced. It's not really worth going into, I think. But I like e3 here in this position. I think it just gives you the most flexibility. I mean, the only issue with going e3 here, like I think it's really solid. It means that if this pawn disappears, or you push it, or it gets taken, or whatever, you don't have to worry about like f2 being vulnerable on the diagonal. So it kind of undermines the fact that this pawn is attacking d4. Basically, you unvulnerable the d4 pawn for yourself, which I think is good. Queen b3 pretty much forces a queen trade, which is cool. Queen b3 pretty much forces a queen trade, which is cool. There's a possibility. It does make it possible for, like, if you force the queen trade here, not that this is necessarily super good, but you can then, the player who does the trading has the opportunity to, at some point, like, double push this pawn, pull the bishop out to b7, and then travel onto the queen on this turn, so that you are up a full queen, which is, like, some people, you're up a full queen and you have the only queen in the game, which is an important thing. Usually it's not worth to spend a timeline just to go up a queen, but to spend a timeline so that you are the player on the board who has the only queen is sometimes good, because queens are just that good. But I don't know about that. So if you believe in that kind of travel, then that probably discourages like forcing the queen trade. Although there are ways in which you can prevent that travel from happening. But you know, whatever. Like you could push this pawn the turn afterward or something like that. Timeline's greater than queen's IMO. I think in general, yes, except for sometimes positions where you have the only queen, which makes your timelines like valuable, which isn't always true. I wouldn't always take that trade, but you know, it depends contextually. Okay, so what actually happens here? That's interesting. So okay, queen b6, we get knight a3. Dreamer playing knight a3. Usually okay, so this makes sense. So, okay, so I usually like to play like knight bd2. The idea is that you want to get your knight to this c4 square, where it's just a real nuisance. Like you're kicking the queen around, and the queen really doesn't want to have to move, because it's already not the most useful. Like, you spent a move to develop it, but you know, unlike developing the rest of your pieces, it's not really necessarily solidifying your position. It's not playing a huge role defensively. It's just sort of around to give you options and flexibility to, you know, like pressure parts of the board. And there isn't really very much that it can pressure on its own without the other pieces being developed. And once there are no kind of travels that are like possible, it kind of just sits there and is almost more of a liability than anything else. While there aren't like weaknesses that it can exploit in the opponent's structure. So kicking it is actually really annoying, because you force your opponent to move it again, which, you know, pointless. It's a waste of time. So instead of the knight bd2, so in this case, rather than like feeling the need to shore up the structure here, with e3, Dreamer wants to both develop the knight in a way that it's possible to for him to play it to c4 to kick the queen. He also wants to not block the bishop, and knights on the edge of the board are always worse than knights in the middle. Knights on the rim, shit's looking grim. But it's like worth it for him to do that, apparently. It was interesting. So knight a3, not what I would have guessed. Okay. I'm surprised that he didn't feel the need to close this up. Because now, potentially, I mean, maybe it results in nothing. We'll see what happens this game. But now this move seems a lot more annoying than if we had played e3 here first instead. So let's see what happens. Okay. Los in response to knight a3 plays c takes d4. Okay, this happens. Okay. So this has happened. What do you do now? What do you do now as Los? Or sorry, as Dreamer? You have options. You could, I mean, probably the safest option by far is to just capture this with the queen. Like, it does get kicked. Like, immediately. Then maybe you trade. And it's like your opponent has isolated doubled pawns, which don't feel fantastic. You're down a central pawn, but is not that big of a deal. If Los just trades in here, then you recapture with the knight. I guess it's more worth it probably to take with the queen rather than the knights, so that you don't have the well, I guess it kind of develops your queen, which you want to do when your opponent's got queen activity. And you know, you don't want your opponent to like suddenly maybe this is a little annoying. You don't want to open up this diagonal, and if it gets kicked and you have to push it back, then that's not very good. You definitely don't want to take here, because then you lose the game. So that's a Peppo G. What about knight c4? What about knight c4 in response to that? Knight c4 is an interesting move. Is there maybe a way? Probably not, right? Knight c4. What about knight c4? What about knight c4? You do make the opponent... force the opponent to move their queen again. And potentially you sort of get to the same place that you would have anyway. Instead, now you've got like a forward developed knight. Like if you just move the queen to somewhere like c5 so that it kicks the... I guess maybe... Well, okay, so, all right, knight c4 and then queen c5. And then if you, like, take here, well, no, actually, because the queen's undefended, so you can't even... Takes. And it gets kicked, maybe. You enable... I guess... Zwischenzug? Hey Los, how's it going? We're just reviewing the game that you submitted. It's the You versus Dreamer game. It's an in-between move, but I don't know that it necessarily accomplishes a lot. Because isn't this knight just going to get kicked? Probably like the same thing is going to happen again, right? Like left queen out here, takes. Then this knight's probably just going to get kicked somehow, right? Maybe with like b5. And that prepares your opponent to Frappuccino anyway. I guess it's an aggressively neutral move. But it seems possible? I don't know. Let's see what actually happens. What does Dreamer do? Okay, Dreamer does actually take with the queen. Okay. So, Dreamer uninterested by knight c4. And invites this queen trade. Which I think probably is what happens here. I don't really see anything else. I think that you want to force white here to recapture with the knight, which maybe will get kicked and then, you know, it'll have to like move back again and they sort of waste a turn, as opposed to enabling your opponent to trade into you and then you have to like destroy your pawn structure. Hey, Crazy, how's it going? So I think probably you just take here. You probably just take here as black, and that's what happened in the game. Okay, so we got queen takes d4, queen takes d4, and then knight takes d4. Obviously, it's just less nice to take with this pawn here. And not the end of the world because the queens are off the board, but you know, just the 4 on one side, 3 on one side. You know, like you don't miss the d pawn too much in 5D chess. That's just how it is. Okay, great. Good afternoon, Tones. How's it going? Okay, so what now? Probably kick the knight, right? You develop your pieces, you kick the knight. Like we said earlier, Los is happy to do this. That's kind of why he wanted to sack proactively. And then, where does the knight go? Ooh, knight goes nowhere. We got bishop f4. Bishop f4. Just ignores it, keeps the tension. Which is fine. As if Los wants to waste 2 turns taking this, then it's not that big of a deal. From Dreamer's perspective. Bishop here is interesting. Bishop here is interesting. It kind of... not quite, but sort of pins this knight a little bit. Because there's like a bishop travel that's possible. Not really lethal. Because the king can just like move over here. But, you know, imagine that maybe like a bishop takes this. In that case, the king can't capture because then this would be checkmate. So, you know, just like developing this bishop is just good. You're going to want to play e3 anyway. I mean, the other thing is like the only other place really to develop the bishop is to g5, which I don't think is fantastic. It just gets kicked. And I don't know, this the bishop here just sort of like looks straight through into black structure. So bishop f4 it is, ignoring the threat to the knight, which I think is fine. In response, a6. Wow. Okay. This is an acknowledgement, I suppose, that c7 looks kind of whack. You know, like if white were to get a knight here, that would be bad news bears. Maybe some... I mean, that's pretty much it. It's like, okay, so, yeah, knight here to here. There's like no fantastic way to defend and c7, and there's already another piece on it. So it would be annoying to have to deal with a knight intrusion here into the queen side. So a6, just a prophylactic move. Bishop stopping on c7 preps a lethal travel, except for the fact that the rook is defending the bishop. And also the bishop can capture itself. If it's traveled on from c7. So I'm not sure which lethal travel you're referring to. I don't think I agree. Bishop stooping on c7 preps a lethal travel. I don't know about that. The other travel, king can't run. Oh, it's smother travel? Wait, what? Stooping on c7? Are you talking about this travel? Because it's defended by 2 pieces. Bishop stooping on c7 preps a lethal travel on f7? What? Or are you saying that c7 was not something that you meant to type? Because I did mention that this knight's kind of pinned because of this travel. Apparently the king can't run though. The king can't run. Let me think about why the king can't run. Bishop goes to here if there's like a knight out. And the king moves here. King is forced to retake if there's a bishop on c7. Okay, so you're saying if there's a bishop on c7, then at some point, if this knight moves, the bishop can come back and travel onto f7. In that sense, then I understand. That's a lot of if, because this bishop is also the main thing that's kicking this knight here. But I mean, hey, the bishop here is difficult to remove, so maybe, probably you do it with the rook, right? You like push b5 and get the rook onto a7 or something weird like that. So maybe. I think you can also do something annoying though with, let me see here. Can you like, not quite. There isn't a fantastic way to trap the bishop, I don't think, but okay. So you're saying just having the bishop here is nice because potentially, if you travel to f7 with a bishop, then it's lethal, which I think is reasonable. Okay. Great. What happens next? So we get the prophylactic a6, which I think is good. Knight c4 happens. This is the knight c4 that we were talking about earlier, except now there's no queen. This is already pretty scary, actually, from Lewis's perspective. There, you know, just, okay, halfway, this middle, like, strip of the board, when there are exclusively your opponent's minor pieces here, you get kind of spooked. You just do. This is why generally it's not, like, super fun to develop your queen before any of the rest of your pieces, especially your bishops. When they get blocked in, you know, you sort of leave yourself like susceptible to your opponent's advances. And I mean, pieces have crazy reach in 5D chess. So these guys are like 1 or 2 moves away from maybe like a lethal travel, right? This looks like a position I would get as white. You know, I agree with that. I agree with that evaluation. How's it going, Ryan? And it also, this looks like a position that I would lose as black. Kind of, except I wouldn't do this. I actually generally don't enjoy that sort of thing, like due to exactly this vulnerability. You don't want to get behind in tempo as black in 5D chess. That's just how you lose. Okay, so what do you do? There's a lot of tension. What's being threatened? Well, certainly knight d6 is spooky. Maybe because knight d6 forces you to capture with, because you can't really move it, because otherwise you probably lose to like knight takes c6 or something, right? So you got to take, and that opens up the diagonal, so that's not good. And it's going to be doubly defended. So you can't just like push this, because then this takes, and then it's not necessarily fantastic for you as black. Although actually, I don't know, maybe that trade of pieces isn't the worst. But you want to stymie your opponent's advance, right? So potentially you could trade here. Let's just see what Los does. It's difficult to speculate in this position. Knight takes d4. We see knight takes d4. It definitely, well, it forces a recapture, because otherwise you get the fork, which maybe is like, okay, well, okay, in this case it's a free rook, so it's definitely bad. But even if it were somehow, even if there were like a knight here or something that we're like defending, well, I don't know if I'd take the trade then. But listen, you want to take this back immediately, right? So it forces this. And then maybe you can develop something with tempo. I'm not positive what your plan is here as Los. But listen, okay, if the 2 knights and the bishop it's bad for business, right? It just looks super spooky. Probably there are some sacks that can happen. Taking some of that material out of the equation, I think is a good call. Just instinctually, I think that it's good, and this forces the recapture, and so we get the recapture. What do you do now? I think you want to open up your bishops. Your bishops are super sag. I think that frappuccinoing this bishop is probably going to happen, but is currently ineffectual. I like e6 here. The idea is that knight d6 is not that easy to play under this context. Yeah, it's much less easy with the one knight than with the two knights. That's for sure. You don't have like sacks and then like travels. So makes sense. Probably, I don't know. I think e6 is the only move that really feels good. You're trying to regroup. As black, opening this bishop up is really nice. d6 seems forced. In this position, d6 seems forced. Do you think that this is only move? Interesting. So you think to stop knight b6? Stop knight b6? You think d6 is forced to stop knight b6? Not to stop, but allow you to defend. So knight b6 happens. What in response to? Oh, sorry. What are you saying? d6. You're saying d6 happens so that you have an answer to knight b6. What exactly are you defending? Perhaps you can sack the rook. That may be the best bet. Crazy doesn't think e6 is good here. Okay, so let's say that this happens. Let's say that knight b6 is played. Then you play rook b8. Then what happens? Or sorry. Let's see. Sorry, this happens and then this happens. Oh, I understand now. You're saying that this is bad because knight b6 happens. That's a good point. Knight b6 happens here. Okay, so let's start with giving a check. Then what do you do as white? Knight b6, bishop b4 check. King d1 is only move, right? Now there's the knight on. Let's see. I think you sack the rook. Black castles. I don't think castling. Well, castling might lose, honestly. I think that if you check and you force the white king to d1, you probably give up the rook and you feel good. Probably need to go knight e4. Yeah, either knight e4 or maybe like g3. Does g3 lose? G3 defensive to enable the castle. Rook? Yeah, I don't care about losing the rook so much because I think black probably has a good to better attack here, questionably. Maybe not. It's difficult to... Well, no. Actually, yeah, you don't need to worry about castling at all. I wouldn't castle. I think castling probably loses because it gives white time to capture the rook and then, like, regroup. I think probably check here, king d1. I think knight e4 here for sure. I don't see exactly how to convert. Oh, although what if you... No, because then you could probably travel on... No, because you have to travel onto the bishop one turn in the past. Hold on. Knight here. Probably after knight e4, I don't know. If this bishop goes this direction, then I think you have like a winning travel, or like a winning tactical combination if the bishop moves off of this diagonal. And if it moves back, I don't really know. Knight e4 should force a defensive move, then you can castle immediately and be safe from Tchaikovsky. Actually, knight e4 might force bishop e3. Knight e4 might force bishop e3, and then you can play rook b8 and not even lose a rook. That's what I was going for, I think. Like if you force the bishop this way, I think white loses after like the knight is out this way somehow. And if you force the bishop this way, then you can just move your rook, something like that. I think knight e4 forces a defensive move here, and that's probably better for black. But listen, d6 makes sense. It makes sense. It's just, I saw d6 and it just made me think, okay, I've like lost this type of position a bunch where I played these moves that are like overly defensive and then it just sort of locks down my position. Because this bishop is useless now, and if I like frappuccino it and maybe try to castle, then white pushes this pawn and is just very happy. And my bishop is incapacitated. And both of my bishops kind of are sad. Let's see what happens in the game. Let's see, what does Los actually do? What is this? C takes d4. E6 might be the better move since you can be aggressive. E6 is actually played in the game. Okay, so Los agrees. In d6, white might even probably sack on d6. Possibly. You don't really have the defensive resources to... What about d6 takes here? Takes... You can't really close the diagonal, maybe? Maybe you can. I guess maybe you like push this pawn to prevent the knight from hopping in and closing the diagonal, so they can probably sack a knight back. I think black probably survives, because they did have to sack a piece. So I think you can counter sack probably. Okay, so e6 played in the game. E6 played in the game. Knight d6 happens. Okay, so knight b6 isn't even the idea here. Dreamer wants to hop in with knight d6. They probably sack a piece back. Yeah. No, I think black has to sack a piece back, but then they're fine. Okay, interesting. I mean, this trade and then here is kind of nice for white in that they've got a sort of bishop that isn't really contested, but they don't have any knights, which is like fine. But the only okay, I'm actually quite sort of surprised by this move from Dreamer, because I think it's a little belligerent without actually setting yourself up for any like winning ideas that you or like advantages that you can press. I mean, maybe, okay, so it's kind of annoying to maybe like kick this bishop and there isn't any like you can't castle, but the attack kind of fizzles and you don't really get very much out of it, so I don't really know. Why wouldn't Dreamer play a3? I guess Dreamer learned to just play a3 recently. A3 here in this position to prevent this from happening. Maybe. Let's see. What happens in the game? Certainly, Los must take here, right? Because yeah, okay. So we got bishop takes and we get bishop takes. Okay. I don't love white's position here. I don't think this is fantastic. Like, you leave yourself super open. All you have is this this like lone bishop that doesn't really get the job done. I guess you're gonna like get the rook into the game soon. Maybe that's a reason for Los to in this position play b5? Probably is what I would do. And prepare to frappuccino this bishop. I think that makes sense. Other candidate moves? I don't know. You could do this. What does this accomplish? You threaten the pawn here, and also the bishop. So maybe you force the bishop to pull back to somewhere that it doesn't want to go. Although even if you sack here and then the king comes out, maybe there's a way that, because this bishop is so awkwardly placed that this sack might actually not even be like a legitimate threat. Though there is now only this one pawn covering e3. Since this bishop's not there, so maybe wacky travel ideas at some point. Yeah, actually, what if you, well... Here, if you go here and then put your knight here and then here, you can travel back to here on this turn. And then it's forced recapture and then this is mate, right? But then if you do this and then like this happens, then you can't pull the knight back around anyway. Okay, so I don't really know. I'd probably try and activate my bishop here as Los. Or maybe try and do something cheeky with the knight. What actually happens in the game? Rook f8 happens. 4 knight move sequence seems promising. Well, the thing is your opponent doesn't have other pieces. Right? So you have a possible plan for black. Knight e4 and then knight d2. Knight d2, huh? Knight d2 is a cute Tchaikovsky idea, I guess. Is that the plan? Knight d2. King has to capture here. Probably. Otherwise they get wrecked and then you travel a bishop to here and then win. Yeah. Okay, so Ryan's got the Tchaikovsky idea. Now you're thinking with Russian composers. That's pretty good. I mean, listen, Narik jests, but what's black gonna do at that stage, right? I don't know. Like they can maybe respond by covering the e3 square on like a, but you kind of want to get this bishop out of here anyway. I don't know. Either with knight if not taken or bishop if taken. Yeah, it's unclear. Well, maybe the only issue with that is that if white catches on after you do the sack, because they've got this pawn here, maybe you do this. And then you trade down. Yeah, I guess it requires like a sack, probably. Although not necessarily. Let's see. So this capture happens. Probably it requires the sack of a bishop somehow. I don't know. The Tchaikovsky is not easy to apply. Held a message for reason aggression. That's hilarious. Okay. I will permit Narik's, okay, kill the bish message. That's funny. Rook can just kill the bish. Yeah, the rooks can certainly sack into the bishop. C2 is defended in the past by the knight on a3 on some boards. He wouldn't go all the way back. We need to see the passports to know how it looks and how easy to apply. Should be easily blocked on c5. I don't know about easily blocked. I think that you probably have to sack the bishop for that, right? You can't go all the way back with the bishop, right? You would go back until you can... Otherwise, the rook just eats the bishop. I mean, you need to go to the turn before this travel happen, or the turn before the king move happens. But you can't Jurassic with a bishop, right? So you just go back to one of, you just go back to like one of these turns. This turn or whatever. Not this turn. But you've got like a few turns here where you can do it. Now you can do super delayed Tchaikovsky sometimes. What? Like you're saying if you want, like you would travel immediately and give them the opportunity to respond? Is that what you're saying? I don't think that makes any sense. There's knights covering that square and it's a bishop, so you can't... You travel as soon as your bishop is attacked? Yeah. You can do that. In this case, I don't think you can because there's a knight on d4 and a knight on a3 that are both looking at the c2 square. So I don't know about that. But listen. What does Los do? Los plays rook f8. Okay. This move might require demystification. Rook f8. Rook f8. Los plays rook f8. Los plays rook f8. Maybe you want to be active with the knight and you're just spooked by the idea of opening up a travel onto f7, right? That's kind of all I can think. Otherwise, it's just a very like impotent, time-consuming move that doesn't develop your undeveloped pieces. Yep. Okay. He just wanted to. All right. I'm not sure I agree because you're not really. I mean, maybe with the two bishops, the other bishop's undefended. Or sorry, undeveloped. I feel like probably you want to be the aggressor in this position. Sometimes you want to make the joke, this guy. At this point, I believe that we were under 5 minutes. Holy shit. There's so much game left. It's only turn 12. Wow, okay. All right, you know what? I mean, the objective is clear. This guy's playing 5D chess, but then they just are. Yeah. That one's a classic. Okay. Oh, never mind. I confuse. Okay, listen. Los wanted to defend f7 before he got his knight out there. I personally don't... I'm not in love with that. I'd rather just activate my other pieces. Especially because you can do this later after you have, like, offensive options, right? You know, no need to do this before you have your other pieces developed, I think. If anything, it's like worse defensively to do that. But okay, whatever. Hey, listen, this happens. What do you do as Dreamer? You probably activate your last remaining minor piece. I don't love the idea of weakening the kingside structure like that with when your opponent has a knight. So probably e3, I think, is the play. I think I'd definitely go e3 here. Either that or maybe, I don't know, maybe rook c1, but that's just so much more ineffectual. I think that you want to use the bishop pair, right? I think you want to activate your bishop. I think e3 is the way to do it. In the game, we do actually see e3. Okay, fantastic. So now what happens? Well, probably either like one of the knight moves that we discussed earlier or the b5 move that I discussed earlier. b5's extra nice right now. Well, in the first place, the reason you want to do this move is to activate your bishop, get control of this long diagonal, which is kind of uncontested because your opponent didn't frappuccino their own bishop. It's also nice to play b5 at this point, just because it cuts off the opponent's bishop. Can't come in here and talk shit. So that's what I do, or some wacky knight stuff. Really, that's kind of your only option. What happens in the game? b5. b5 does happen. Okay, fantastic. There we go. Makes sense. All right. Now we're getting into like the suit. This is always where it's like that weird, you don't have enough pieces to consider too many crazy, like degenerate 5D travel shenanigans. There aren't very many like insanely lethal attacks that you can really put together with like the material that you have on the board right now. Especially with the queen's gone, and like the, there are just few pieces, so few pieces, but you haven't yet traded down into an endgame. So this, I think, is where, for the most part, I tend to lose. It's the point in the game, I kind of think that it becomes unclear how to formulate a game plan. Or maybe put less pessimistically, your options really open up in terms of like how you want to develop, because it's going to, you know, the game kind of in some sense has slowed down, and you're trying to consider, okay, like what structures do I want for my end game? Like what am I going for? What am I playing into? So it's going to involve a lot of like minor sort of like rearrangement of your pieces, pushing of your pawns, maybe decide whether you want a castle or not, you get your rooks together, etc. So it's like the rising action in the middle of the movie, leading up to sort of the climax. I don't know what to do here. I think it's kind of like take your pick. Let's see what Dreamer does. Dreamer plays bishop e2, which I think makes a lot of sense. Makes your bishop more useful. It's as simple as that. I think probably preventing both, putting your bishop in a place where it can actually see some squares, and also preventing your opponent's knight from hopping to g5 is probably good. Probably. Okay, now 94, 92 is certainly a good plan. I think you're probably right. I was thinking potentially as a move, bishop d3 instead. It does allow the knight to hop in here, but then you just kick it, and like if it sacks, I think you can take and then block, you know, with impunity, so you don't really have to worry about it. But hey, Dreamer first bishop e2, not positive why. Like over bishop d3, maybe he thinks that it'll, well, maybe he, I guess, okay, so what bishop d3 does is prevent knight e4 from coming in, but otherwise, I mean, it does hit this pawn, but other than that, it doesn't, you know, in this position, the bishop has the flexibility to maybe like go to g4 if this knight moves or something like that. Whereas from here, you know, like anything that you can achieve from this position, like trying to hop to maybe e4 or something like that, is also achievable by bringing the bishop to e2 first and then to f3. You also have the option of bringing your bishop to h5. You know, not with the knight here, obviously, but I guess he just thinks that there's more flexibility there. What about rook d1 in response to knight d2? I think you're happy to see that happen. Because, let's see, okay, so if you, knight d2, so if you get the knight to d2 and then the rook's in response, move to d1, can you... Well, no, you need another turn, I guess, huh? And you don't have a dark square bishop anymore. Oh, in this situation, if you do knight d2 and then rook d1 happens, then you sack on the bishop 2 turns in the past, forced only move takes, and then you win the game. So knight d2, rook d1 actually just loses. I think. Not forced takes. Oh yeah, you're right. It's not forced takes because it doesn't check the king in the past. Yeah, it can wait there for a few turns. And so I suppose then the next turn the bishop can recapture. Right, the next turn the bishop can recapture from the original timeline. And then you've traded a bishop for a knight and lost timeline priority, and that's it. King can go f1, and where's the threat? Thing is that, again, the rook can take the bishop before the Tchaikovsky can occur. If the knight, okay, so if the travel happens and the king goes to f1... Because you haven't caught up enough to... like the next turn, the knight can hop to the original timeline and cause some chaos. Maybe it's not great. Maybe it's not great. Maybe knight d2 is not fantastic. But I don't know. It's not clear. Maybe you'd want to like get the bishop out and the rook to c8 first. And then it becomes a really strong idea. But what Ryan said is that like now is the time for this. I don't really know. Let's see what happens. In response to bishop e2, Los does go knight e4. All right, knight activity. I think probably I would have finally activated this bishop first. It does force him to respond, right? He probably moves this. Although if this happens, then maybe that's annoying. Well, no, you probably trade this in and you're happy because your bishop was so useless anyway. I don't know. Well, okay, so this kicks the bishop. Let's see. Wow, this bishop trades into this rook. Really? In response to 94, Dreamer actually plays bishop takes f8, which forced recapture because it checks the king in the past. Interesting. I guess it's a pretty sensical Dreamer decision. Because Dreamer loves to... I've said this before. I said this in the most recent the 5D Chess World Championship commentary that I did. But he's got a very, like, positional, classical chess heavy playstyle. Where, you know, he likes to play solid. And in an endgame that's, like, simplified, you can do a lot more than rooks than you can... with the other minor pieces in regular chess, obviously. And in 5D chess, there are like caveats to that since the minor pieces are so damn tricky. And you can get, you know, they've got much better sort of like offensive capabilities in terms of like the travels that they're capable of. But I guess Dreamer feels confident in his ability to simplify further to like force, I guess maybe with like a castle, and then get his rooks out here, trade his bishop for one of the other minor pieces. I'd be nervous making that trading your only like really active piece for a rook that wasn't doing anything. I guess what's the alternative? Maybe like retreat the bishop, still like look at the, I don't know. Well, okay, maybe you're afraid of getting trapped or something. I don't know. I guess this could be a long-term play to draw out the king with the Tchaikovsky idea. Yeah, but it's not drawing out the king. You know? Castling is OP. I assume that's Dreamer's plan. Dreamer loves to castle. And it's like the only way to, you know, how else are you going to develop this rook? So either Dreamer loves to castle, probably that's his plan. It's just weird that he would choose this time to, because you can always do that later. I don't know. It's weird. But sure, why not? I mean, I guess all Los has going for him is this knight anyway. And if this gets kicked now with this bishop or whatever, which maybe is the next move, then that could be trouble. Right? Because what do you do in response to this? Maybe this was the idea. Because now you force a further simplification, which makes a lot of sense, right? Alternatively, yeah, no. Okay. Now that I see the immediate aftermath, which is that you can just play bishop f3, it makes a lot of sense. Because you know, yeah, this is the reason that Dreamer is confident he could force the simplification. He hits the knight and then the rook, so one of those pieces going down. What do you hear is Los? Either bishop b7 or maybe d5. Probably those are your best bets, right? I don't think that there's like an insane Chad way to like sack the rook or anything like that. I don't like this move because it pins the knight, but it's not like a pawn can hit the knight anyway. I also don't like this move because it blocks in the light squared bishop. I suppose you could also play f5, which defends the knight without blocking in the bishop. But that's just kind of sus. I mean, your opponent doesn't have pieces left anyway. I think it's fine. Let's see. The benefits of maybe it's nice. Maybe it's better to push one of the pawns because having a pawn parked here could be frustrating in the future because it's a light squared pawn and so it gives your bishop an outpost. Doesn't Los have Q? A knight travel? Which knight travel are you referring to? Because if you travel to take the bishop one turn in the past, then well, Dreamer's not forced to recapture is one thing. So you kind of give up timeline advantage for no reason. If we're talking about this one, he just retakes. I don't really know. Illegal? Oh yeah, he's also in check on this board. I'm also not convinced that it's a big deal. You have to prepare castling, but you can't beat the efficiency of castling? Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Okay. This must be what's played, yeah? It is. Okay, bishop f3 is played. Of course. Okay, so of those options, the candidate moves bishop b7, d5, f5. Los chooses to play f5. Now, do you take here as Dreamer? Probably keep the tension. Probably keep the tension. This might be a good opportunity to castle. Look at the... like... How the hell is this bishop ever going to perform an anti-castle travel? It'd be like pawn push, bishop, 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 pawn push. It's just probably not going to happen. So I think you're probably safe to castle here. Dreamer does actually castle short here. Okay, here we go. Dreamer's prepped the castle. This looks decent. Probably. Man, this bishop is so boxed in. It is a little spooky that when this bishop is eventually frappuccinoed, that it's going to have like a direct line to g2 here, which is maybe spooky. Oh no, how did Cement predict the game? Kappa? I mean, a lot of these moves are obvious, but I try not to look at the move that's played until after we've had a chance to sort of scope it out on our own, positionally. I think you probably frappuccino here. Because finally, I've been waiting like 20 turns for this to happen. Right? There's like nothing else unless there's lose a rook for cheek. I don't see it. I don't really see any way to make this work. Well, nah, it's probably not gonna happen. Okay, let's see what happens. Bishop e7's played. Okay, we got the frappuccino. I feel like black has nothing here, so I'm curious how this game will end up. Samet said the play is a joke. You're talking about the anti-castle travel? Oh, you're talking about the anti-castle travel. That's funny. Okay. If you anti-castle travel, my mind is blown. Holy shit. All right. We get bishop frappuccino. Now what? The rooks are connected, so you probably get them into the game. I think you probably keep the if you keep the tension for this long, because now I think if the bishop takes here, it's actually pretty good, maybe for black. You know, as white here, you bring your rooks together. You push your pawns up. You do dreamer things. That's what you do next. I think you do dreamer things. What happens next? Rook AC1. Okay, Rook AC1. Makes sense, just intuition-wise, that you want to defend this pawn. I feel like in classical chess, I always predict incorrectly which rook is the right one to centralize. In this case, Dreamer wanted to centralize his A rook, which I think is fine. That makes sense. Okay. Knight D6. Knight D6. Pulling back the knight. Kind of encouraging this trade in like a clean way. Okay, what was being threatened here? Let's think. Was this rook threatening anything? Because I quite like keeping the knight here. it cuts off the bishop. The bishop's like useless here, right? And if the bishop actually trades, then I think you have an advantageous position as the black player. But knight d6 happens. What otherwise? Okay, what? The rook's gonna come in here and win a pawn? Is that the idea? Maybe? Something like that. Although, I don't know. Let's see what happens. Knight d6 is played. Knight d6 is played, defending this bishop and encouraging this trade, which probably Dreamer is happy to do. Bishop c6 and then pushing kingside pawns, I think, is the only plan. I think you're probably right. I think you're right. I don't like knight d6. I don't like this forward knight. I think is doing a lot for you, and there's no way for him to kick the knight anyway, and the knight is rendering this bishop useless. So I really like the knight parked on e4. Ryan says knight d6 and you really have nothing. Yeah, bishop c6 I think makes sense. Weird, man. Weird. Okay. Bishop takes b7 does happen, which I think makes sense. Because it means that because as Dreamer, you're much happier with this pawn structure than one where there's like the e4 pawn, I think, parked here. Probably. See, the thing is here, and you also, if you take here, then the rook comes down here, right? Rook c7. And then aren't you screwed? Don't you lose this pawn? Like 2D tactics wise? I think that's the second time that the 2D tactics has come up. One with the bishop f3 to skewer the, or I guess skewer or pin, depending on what your perspective of like relative piece value. Yeah, but here after takes rook c7 exists, right? And you're not going to lose your knight, so you're probably going to lose this pawn, which like gets you into Monka S territory. No. I mean, listen, you can do anything with a knight in 5D chess. I'm still spooked. A knight in a dream? You have a knight? A knight in a dream will take you far in 5D chess, so that's nothing to sneeze at. But okay, bishop takes b7. Knight takes b7 because, of course, you don't want to lose. And then we do actually get rook c7, and you don't want to lose the knight. So, like, one of the only... you either play knight d6 here, or knight d8, which seems bad, or because it's gonna get kicked immediately anyway with this rook. With this rook capturing here, right? You probably just want to get the knight back to where it was on e4, like as soon as possible. Knight d6 does happen. Now you probably just take the free pawn, kick the knight. Right, straightforward. No, actually in the game we get rook fc1, connecting the rooks. Which is weird. What? Okay, Dreamer. I mean, you see a free piece, take a free piece. What's the downside to this? Am I missing something? Maybe can the rook get trapped or something in a weird way? Not really. The king can't move because then he loses another pawn. Am I losing something? I guess you do this if you're scared of Jurassic counterplay. I don't like it. I don't like it, but it's what Dreamer does. I think it's too what do you have to be afraid of here, man? I don't know. I disagree, but it's what Dreamer does. Because this also gives now, not that it really, I mean, now black just defends the pawn. There's also counterplay with the knight if you take first. Counterplay that there isn't if you don't do this. Like what's the counterplay that exists then but not now? Because now you don't get the piece advantage, or the you don't grab the pawn. Which like you need a material advantage when you have like when you're going up against like rook against knight rook. Knight is kind of stuck defending here. Stuck defending what? Getting a tempo to get closer. I only see rook c8, then possible Jurassic, says counterplay. Dude, I disagree. I think you should take the pawn there. Knight has to get as close to the king. I don't know, man. I don't know about any of that. I think that's overblown. You've got the rook here. Whatever. As white, I think you should take this pawn. No questions asked. I don't see any convincing argument against that. I would have taken first 2 TBF. Now you just defend as you just defend as black. Okay, so rook ac1. Sorry, rook fc1. King e7 to defend the pawn. Makes a lot of sense. And then b3. Is there ever any juicy pieces on c2 to Jurassic? I don't think so. Okay, c2 is taken by this knight, by this rook. Sorry, oh, c2. Sorry. Right, my bad. My bad. c2. Dude, there was never anything on c2, which is funny. On c4 there was a minor piece. On c4 there was this knight. Yeah, maybe rook here's juicy. Possibly. I don't know. c4 Jurassic was something Dreamer probably considered. You think so? Do you really think so? Maybe. Kept rooks on the c file. Oh, I guess it's a generous explanation, right? It makes sense. Otherwise, why? Yeah, okay, sure. Why not? But I still don't... Alright, whatever. Whatever. Okay, listen. b3 is played here. Now, okay, you got your rooks. You doubled your rooks. Now you push your pawns because there are no pieces left. Like normally you'd do a king walk here in 2D chess, but it's 5D chess and you don't want to lose. So you just start pushing your pawns. This takes away this square from the knight. You know, it is what it is. Okay, knight e8 is now played to kick the rook. Which makes some amount of sense. c7 is off limits, so you can't really go like rook b7 here. You probably don't want to retreat the rook. So what do? Here you could force a rook trade. And then go for the rook versus knight endgame. I mean, I'm spooked by that, but we'll see. Also blocks e8 for the future. Wasn't your king on f8 like a second ago? So that's also something you gotta block. Okay, so let's see what happens in the game. I don't really... Pulling it back, I think, feels bad. Because the position is kind of closed. I think you probably want the only rook in the game. Even then, I'm not sure it looks scary. Maybe you want to allow the knight for rook trade. Maybe you're happy with like pushing a pawn or something. I don't really know. Yeah, but there's nothing on e8 before a king. Sure, but it's the most recent thing that matters. So f8 is also the last thing on f8 was a king. But you know, sure. Now you block on e8. Sure, why not? You know, it's one square down, right? Not to a Jurassic check. Just get the rook to the back rank. There's a fully 100% nothing black can do. Yeah, it's a good point. It's kind of paralyzing if you force this trade. Which, I mean, that's like the only thing that can happen, right? Is that really you can trade here. Is that actually what happens? Let's see. Knight e8. Rook c8 happens. Okay, rook c8 does happen. Rook takes c8 does happen. And rook takes c8 does happen. Okay. You're on the back rank. It's pretty Monka-esque. Okay, at this stage, it's a bit Monka-esque for black. f8 is like a Jurassic check that can happen in the future. What do you do here as black? Well, you need to defend these pawns, otherwise you lose. You need counterplay, so you got to get your knight into the game. I guess you'd kick the rook here, maybe. You have to keep this king here so that you don't lose on f8. The knight probably, or the rook probably goes to like a8 and starts gobbling up pawns, right? And then this knight hops out here and tries to, you know, maybe make some plays happen. It's pretty spooky actually. Maybe you push this pawn as Dreamer here. Then this pawn gets pushed. Okay, actually this is an interesting endgame. Okay, so what happens here in response to rook takes c8? Go mate with knight, easy. You can't move knight because a Jurassic on h8 is killer. Jurassic on h8. You make a good point. You make a good point, Ryan. A Jurassic on h8, maybe like here? Pretty brutal, huh? That's kind of nuts, yeah. Cause here, and then, you know, king moves, and then you, I don't know if you take the rook, or if you check here, and then, where's the, yeah, maybe like check here, and yeah, you probably just take the rook and then prepare to mate here. Something like that. Jurassic on h8 taking the rook. When was the rook last on h8 is the problem. Okay, so you could go here. That looks pretty good. I think it probably looks better in the endgame position, actually. I think I would rather get a rook to h8, like wherever that was after the trades happen. With the rook here, I think I'd rather get a rook to h8 here. I think you're going all the way back as far as possible. I think I like the earlier one because it's just it's very clear what the idea is to mate, and it's very unclear what your opponent does to prevent it. And you've got the other rook there. Like, it's simple. Your opponent has less counterplay. Because also you have to realize black doesn't have counter troubles anymore. There are no counter Jurassics. They're probably super low on time right now as well. But Jurassics are always something you have to worry about when there's a rook. You know, it's like one of the only things that the rook has going for it is like the Jurassic potential, right? And especially on the back rank, it can be really killer. Okay, actually knight d6 is played here. Let's see if Dreamer plays rook c2? Okay, Dreamer's really afraid, I guess, of the knight hopping in. I'm disappointed. c2 doesn't even allow a Jurassic. It doesn't... Maybe if the rook goes pawn grubbing, it might actually lose. Like rook a6 maybe allows the knight to hop in here to here mate. Then again, the king can just go here, but then that allows... I don't really know. But okay, rook c2 happens, which I'm shocked by. Suddenly it feels like white has no options. And black is winning. I think the rook on the back rank was like the absolute dream, right? That sucks. Okay, here knight e4 happens. Which, granted, now it doesn't have anywhere to go. So that's good. For Dreamer. It makes this move much less scary. Now what do you do as Dreamer? I don't really know. Push your pawns? Kick the knight, maybe? I don't know. I feel like this pawn probably actually does a lot of work. That, like, you don't realize that it does, you know? What happens in the game? We're getting into it now. We're getting into the end game. Well, we drifted into this end game. I didn't even notice it happened, but suddenly it's king and rook versus king and knight, you know? With 7 pawns on each side. Okay, wow. What happens here? F3. Knight is kicked. What happens to the knight? Knight get kicked. It runs away. It can go back to where it came from. It can go to f6. Or it can go to g5. It goes to f6. Okay. f3 might lose. f3 might lose. I'm in a position like this. I'm surprised that he pushed f3. I think that I probably push my other side pawns. g5 and travel. g5 and travel. Yeah, so I mean, one of the f3 generates two weaknesses, one on e3 and one on g3, right? g3 is still covered by this, but sure. Sure. Knight g5 and g3 has to be played, I think. Junior would have to move the king, or king move. You know, for someone who like spent so long not moving any of these pawns, I'm shocked by this turn of events. You have two knights in the travel. We only have the one travel. And like g3 is defended on the other board. So like here and then takes. And then you've got like a knight here. Oh, I see what you're saying. You're saying immediately g5. And then travel on to this board. I gotcha. Yeah, so then takes can't happen because this is mate. I gotcha. That is defendable by g3. Because then the pawn recaptures one turn in the past. So g3 works. Or you could allow the travel and move the king, which I like less. I think g3 is probably okay here, actually. G3 hangs another pawn. G3 hangs another pawn. Playing g3 and losing f3 is crazy. That's a good point. This move, losing it, yeah, okay. When you put it that way, wow, my vision's really lacking here, isn't it? Okay, so if knight g5 is played and you push g3, which I guess is necessary, the knight immediately captures f3 with check, and you probably lose. Just you probably super lose. It's pretty Monka-esque. Although the only piece your opponent has is a knight. But you're pretty stuck, huh? Like, where do you... Okay, so, like, if you allowed this to happen, then knight up. Or, sorry, king up. I don't like f3. I don't like f3. King g2 gets forked. f3 king g2. Oh yeah, just 2d forked, right? Holy shit. Okay, so knight g5, g3, knight takes f3, king g2, and then you just get forked, and then like you for sure lose. That's not good. But okay, so if knight f, so if you let the knight take f3, you just lose. Like, where does the king go? King here. Like if the knight is on f3 here, king here like loses in a turn because you travel to here. Looks like g3 is forced loss. Yeah, so I guess you don't do this. So I guess you would have to enable the travel. You would have to allow the travel to happen to here. and then move your king? Wow, okay. That's fucking brutal. All right, super spooky. Okay, so these are the perils of F3, the weaknesses that it creates here. It's a reason that I didn't like F3. Okay, wow, but knight F6 happens. We don't see knight G5 and then like spectacular fireworks, but it does demonstrate that in this endgame here, Dreamer's, there's a little spaghetti coming out of Dreamer, not dealing with this knight very well. It's really hard to deal with knights in an endgame like this, man. We don't have any pieces. The knight's like the scariest piece personally for me to have near my king, because there are just so many things that you have to cover. It's like the knight gets, you know, because it can move like 1 move away, 2 moves away, because of like the travels and stuff. It gets access to like this huge snowflake of moves suddenly. Anyway, Low's not capitalizing, but probably both players are super low on time here. So now G3 is played. Now G3 is played. You believe that theoretically speaking, a rook should win to a knight? That's so, in what, like what, okay, yeah, if you had maybe like only king and rook and king and knight on the board, possibly, but statements like that in 5D chess I think are pretty meaningless. Like it has to be contextual based on like the, based on like the pawn structure, right? So I don't, you know, I don't think any blanket statements like that really carry any meaning. Unless the knight is close? Yeah, okay, so you've already caveated it. I think it depends. Depends on, I think, tempo, positioning. I think it depends on everything. Reason is because of Jurassic rooks? Yeah, maybe. Assuming the whole game was played, the rook will have many winning Jurassics. Yeah, okay, so if you're like 200 moves out, then like you basically just win with the rook, right? There's a lot more that the opponent has to cover, so the player without the rook is a lot more limited in terms of like the like their king mobility, and however, you know, it's really easy just to mate with a rook, or sorry, to mate with just a knight, as we just saw. So it's tricky. It's tricky. Okay. Where the hell were we? G3 has happened. Okay, now what? Knight D5. Knight D5, hitting this pawn. And basically that's it. Or maybe, you know, also threatening Knight B4? Something like that. King F2 happens. We get king activity. Which I think is good, although now it begs the question of whether like a travel is possible, maybe? Something like that. Kind of spooky, but hey, we see king F2. Rooks definitely get better as the board gets sparser, but that's true of a lot, I guess. Yeah, I mean, that's also like fundamentals of 2D chess, right? But even more so in 5D chess for Jurassic reasons. Okay. King F2 has been played. King F2 is really scary. For white. But it's, you don't get, you probably don't get a lot out of a treble here. Maybe you do, I don't know. It's really hard to say. Okay, so probably this knight move was planning knight b4. And we do see knight b4. Knight b4 happens. Where does this rook go? Well, the rook probably wants to prevent the knight from hopping into here, because otherwise, I don't know, probably black's gonna get some winning travel from here or something like that. So you gotta defend it. And so you have two options. One of them hangs a2, which is c3. You probably don't want to do that. So now your rook's on d2. Is rook d2 played? Yes. Okay. So see how, like, what a different dynamic. Like this board state here, or this board state here, compared to this board state here. It's only because of Dreamer's like passivity, right? He wanted to cover his bases instead of go for like aggression. And that's just rough in 5D chess. That's just the way it is. I always like when the notation is KH something, because it always sounds like someone's describing a new Kingdom Hearts game. probably whatever is the something in the brackets. It sounds like it could realistically be a Kingdom Hearts game. Those games are absurd. Okay, so Rook D2 happens. Now what? Really shuts down a lot. Now, do you have any fresh ideas? I quite like the idea of maybe like pushing this pawn and then going like knight here. Well, it's not going to be easy to get there though, is it? Maybe knight back and then push this pawn. Probably could have done that like a turn ago. But I don't know. Okay. Knight d5 is played. Knight d5 is played. In response, white plays a4. Why would you play kh1? Terrible game. Kingdom Hearts 1 is actually the only game that I think is good of them. But we're here to review 5D chess, not Kingdom Hearts. Okay. A4. Sure. You want to open up the board to make your rook useful, maybe, yeah? If the rook doesn't have a pawn to defend here, then, you know, you can start, like, pulling it down the queen side to make it worth anything. So that makes some sense. What do you do as Los? Well, you can now bring this knight up, right? And he can't kick it with anything because now, maybe this is why that's a bad move. Now black has this insane outpost, right? With b4. Knight c3, b4 is just like, you're fucked, aren't you? That creates outpost. I guess outpostiness doesn't matter since it's a losing king pawn endgame. True. A4, really spooky. Okay, knight c3 immediately played by Los. It's just, I mean, it's just such an evocative move. You can do like whatever from here, right? Okay, a takes b5 happens, and then you just take it back, so whatever. Now, what exactly do you do? It also cuts off the rook. I mean, I guess you could, well, you can't because the knight is there. So it isn't really a great way to activate the rook. I mean, you can kick the knight, but then it's gonna, you can kick the rook. Oh, actually that loses. Sorry, you can kick the knight with the rook. But actually then you can go knight d1 and then travel 2 turns in the past to here, and that loses on the spot. Because there are no checks that you can give to prevent that either. So this rook is super stuck, man. I guess here you do this, and then you push b4, right? That's probably like all you can do. Because you really don't want b4 to happen. I'm guessing? I'm going to guess b4 here. So after a takes b5, a takes b5. Rook c2! Dreamer plays rook c2! Oh, shit. Okay. Question is, does Lo see that he has mate in 2? And it's even, this move is even a check, so he can't prepare a Jurassic. Which sucks. That sucks. Yeah, and this travel is 2 turns into the past too, so the king doesn't, oh shit, it's unavoidable. In response to rook c2, Los plays knight d1. My man. Dreamer blundering mate again. Classic Dreamer. Are we calling this the Dreamer now? Blundering mate. Blundering mate in 2. No, we won't be that cruel. That it would be a real Dreamer move to shit on Dreamer for being bad. So, and we're not gonna stoop to that level. Okay. In response, a reluctant king e2, and then knight 2 turns into the past. is mate. Wow. Wow. Wow, you know, this is very instructive. The fact that like this game swung from what looked like, I mean, crushing is a strong word, but like when in, let's see, what turn was it? In this position, I thought black's fucked. I just really thought that white could like convert this game somewhat straightforwardly. And then this trade happened and I thought, okay, black doesn't really have tempo or counterplay now on this move. And then suddenly black was on the defensive because they pulled back the rook. There wasn't really like any room for rook mobility on the c file. The knight activity forced some I think that these structural vulnerabilities were unforced largely from Dreamer. You know, he's just trying to like push up his pawns, kick around the knight, 2D style, and then at the end here, I mean, Dreamer probably still had fantastic travels for like a while. He could have like Jurassic, you know, like letting go of like the position in the future. But instead he, you know, eventually he lets the knight weasel into here. He gives this knight a little outpost kind of, and he blunders mate in two. So wow, Dreamer wasn't thinking 5D. Even up until the very last move, I think Dreamer is winning. Honestly, I think you're probably right. I think bishop takes f8 was a very odd move. I thought rook c2 was also a very odd move. I completely agree. I think that bishop f8 was like unforced. Just keeping that bishop there, I think is really good. I think white was here. I think black was all right before black played knight d6. Probably. I thought that black was doing pretty well. Actually, here you can maybe... I don't know, maybe there's a line where, maybe like instead of knight d6, or whenever that happened, or maybe before it, well, you probably want to play this. And then you, no, because then you can get the rook out. And maybe knight d6 makes sense, I don't know. I don't like knight d6, but maybe it was forced because of like rook ideas. Anyway, certainly there were a ton of Jurassics, but when you're low on time, it's difficult to, you know, consider all the Jurassics, right? But I think it's also clear that when it got down to the end game, Dreamer's 2D instincts kicked in, and you know, he just got, which happens. Yeah, the reason I showed this game is more because of the end game, which was interesting. Yeah, I mean, 5D end games, well, we talk about how they don't really happen very often, but they kind of do, especially if you're playing Dreamer. I think that they happen relatively frequently. It was a really interesting game. Wow, 5D chess so volatile, man. Thanks for sharing, Los. Also, well played. Congrats. Wow.